Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Pastor Tim, for inviting me to your church. I am totally blessed to be here, and I got to worship with you guys this morning. So thank you so much. Is this better? Yes, thumbs up? Perfect. That picture right there, that's my husband and I. He's here today. His name is Aaron. Aaron and I have been married for 5 years, and believe it or not, this is the first time he's going to hear me preach live. He's heard me preach virtually, and the reason for that is we got married in 2019. I went back to Pakistan and I married him, and then we applied for immigration, and that takes about 12 months. So about a month before everything was due, which was April 2020, a little thing called COVID happened about March 2020, and then the world shut down. So there caused many delays. And then there were some delays because of COVID, and then just some delays because life happened. So this is his first time hearing me preach, and I'm just glad to be sharing it with him, and then also with you guys together as a church. I really believe the body of Christ, which is the church altogether, you could go into any church, any building, and feel at home sometimes because you know the Spirit of the Lord is there, and you know the people are serving Jesus, they're Bible-believing, God-fearing, and it really does feel like home here this morning. So thank you again for inviting me here. Today we're going to talk about how God is faithful, how he shows up in our lives, and when he shows up in our lives. I feel like Aaron stole my introduction illustration because I wanted to talk about who here likes traveling. Hands up if you're a traveler. And then do you like getting souvenirs? Are you one of those people that buys souvenirs? I'm a keychain girl. I have a ton of keychains stored away in some box somewhere, but I collect keychains from even different cities I've been to. I love collecting those. Some people collect mugs. Some people like collecting art, and that they bring home and display in their homes. Some people really enjoy bringing home decor, so then when others come into their houses, they can go, oh, where did you get this? And they share a story of when they went to this place, or that one time they had this experience. These little things, these little souvenirs create conversations with those who weren't there to experience those things with us. They create this moment where we're able to be with people and tell them, hey, yeah, we went to this place, it was really cool, look what I got. I want to tell you a souvenir story I got. Now, it's kind of an embarrassing one. I love Anne of Green Gables. I mean, like, love Anne of Green Gables. Watched the cartoons, read the books, all of that stuff, and I'm sure there's many Anne of Green Gables fans here. So my dream growing up was I'm going to go to PEI one day. This is it, I'm going to PEI. I went to PEI after I graduated from seminary. Me and my friend did a 2-week-long trip to PEI. We did like a road trip on the East Coast. So we hit PEI, then we drove all the way back to Ontario, but we hit all the other eastern provinces. I love these flowers, these lupins that you see. They're called lupins. I thought they were gorgeous. So when I'm going to the store, the souvenir shop, I see someone selling seeds of lupins for $5, and I'm like, what a bargain, I get to bring these back to Ontario. And then on my way back from PEI, I stopped in New Brunswick. We met with our friend Sandy, and I'm showing her, all the things I got. I'm telling her all about my trip. And then I show her the lupin seeds, and she starts laughing. And I ask her, I'm like, Sandy, what's up? Why are you laughing at this? And she tells me, she's like, did you know you just got ripped off? Lupins are considered weed in the East Coast. They're similar to dandelions in Ontario. They're kind of a nuisance. People don't really like them. They're pretty, but people hate it in their yards. So this is my claim to fame for souvenirs, is having being ripped off, and by bringing home essentially East Coast weeds and nuisance. I still have the seeds. I never planted though, because they told me they won't plant in southern Ontario because the soil is not as moist as it is for the Atlantic provinces, but I still kept them, and I still think it's funny. But yeah, that's my funny souvenir story. I'm sure you have your own memories. I'm sure there's photos somewhere at home. I'm sure there's souvenirs somewhere. There's pictures or arts or mugs. You have your own stories that you share with people. Or when your grandkids come down and they look through your pictures, you tell them, oh, this was when I did this. This was from this time, or this was from this and this wedding. You have memories and stories that you share. These things help us to remember things that have happened in the past and share them with future generations. And oftentimes, the things that help us remember stuff reminds us of God's faithfulness in our life. The title of my message today is Remember When. and we're going to be looking at Joshua like Diane had read. The entire story of Joshua, if you're not familiar with it, Joshua is the sixth book in the Bible. Joshua was written in 1450, and it's actually a continuation of the great Exodus story that the Israelites had from Egypt all the way through, and they're entering into the Promised Land now. What's going on, majority of the book is reflecting back on what God has done for them in the wilderness, and now moving forward and taking territories and land in the province, territories and land in the promised land, promised land. Joshua is a successor of Moses. Most of the story here, Moses' journey starts off when he gets into Egypt. When he's in Egypt, there's all these plagues that happen, and I'm just going to give you a brief recap of what's going on. There's all these plagues that happen in Egypt, and Pharaoh is stubborn and says, nope, not going to let you guys go. Then there's this last plague that comes through. It's called the plague of the firstborn. Death of every firstborn child happens there. And it's on the 10th day of the first month, in the Jewish calendar. It's the month of Nisan. People in Egypt are in bondage. They're struggling. They're enslaved. They really are crying out to God to come and help them. What happens next is when they get out of Egypt, they enter into the wilderness. Now, some wonderful things happen in the wilderness. They're given the 10 Commandments, which help them live in order, figure out how they're going to live their life forward, and how they're going to be set apart and holy. They get bread from heaven, manna comes from heaven, they get water from a rock, and then these people also do some really ridiculous things like build a calf. They start a rebellion. A lot of them die off because of leprosy. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in the wilderness. What I want you to remember is this, the importance of that 10th day, first month, because that day represented the Passover. In Exodus 12, verses 1-3, it says this, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, 'This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household.'" This day ends up being the Passover. So they celebrate this even today, Passover, or Feast of Unleavened Bread. When they get into the Jordan River, when they're about to cross into the Promised Land, it has been exactly 40 years from the first Passover that they have celebrated to now that they're entering into the Promised Land. Because again, it is the 10th day of the first month. It is exactly 40 years before they're entering in. Now, when they left Egypt, they had to cross a body of water. That body of water was the Red Sea. And the story goes that the Egyptians are getting out of Egypt and they're crossing the Red Sea. And then they're getting into the Promised Land. They again have to cross another body of water, and that's the Jordan River. I believe that this entire story of their exit out of Egypt and slavery and bondage has them crossing into water, and then there's the wilderness experience, and then you have the crossing into Promised Land with another story of crossing through water, is because water in the Old Testament was often used for purification, which meant that as they're going through this water, they're being cleansed and purified, although they don't know it, of their mentality of being slaves in bondage in Egypt. And then as they're walking through the Jordan River, they're being cleansed again and purified of their mentality of being in the wilderness. The Lord is really showing them that He is truly leading them. He is the one in charge of them, and He is the one purifying them and leading them through. The other thing I want to point out is that when you cross a body of water, there's no turning back. You're in way too deep to want to turn back. When they're crossing the Red Sea, there's no turning back because the Egyptians are chasing after them. And when they're crossing the Jordan, there's no turning back because all they have known in the wilderness is being in the wilderness, which essentially had lots of blessings, but also lots of really terrible things took place. So there's no turning back when you cross these. Something I want to point out here, though, there's two different ways they cross the water. When they're at the Jordan River, in the book of Joshua, and they're trying to cross, the Lord tells them, as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Lord of all the earth, sets foot in the Jordan, the water flowing downstream will be cut off and will stand up in a heap. The Jordan at this time was at flood stage, which is not a good sign for anyone trying to cross over. It means there's a lot of water, not safe for you to travel with your wife, your kids, your stuff, your tents, your animals, your cattle, your everything. Not a smart choice to cross over because you can lose a lot of stuff in the middle there. When they're crossing the Red Sea, it's the complete opposite. There's no come to the water, step in, and then we'll walk away. When they're at the Red Sea, God tells Moses, hey, I need you to raise your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Here's why I think this is important. These two bookend events, and perhaps they will apply to our lives. Sometimes the Lord does the miracle for us, and we walk through. We see the miracle happening, and we see dry ground, and then we get to walk through. And sometimes God brings us to the edge and asks us to take steps of faith. And then we see the miracle happening as we're walking in faith. It's important to remember sometimes in life, God will do some incredible things in your life to clear up obstacles. And then you will walk in faith, knowing that is dry ground. And then sometimes in life, it seems like he's silent and distant and not there, but truly he's asking you to take steps forward so he can show you in the midst of your mess what he is capable of doing. Here's why that's important for us in our lives. When they left Egypt and they're crossing the Red Sea, they don't know this God very much. They only know this God because their ancestors had perhaps shared a couple of stories. They heard a little bit. But they've been in bondage and slaves for about 430 years. That's a long time. That gives you a superiority complex. And that'll make you feel like you're not really worth anything. If every day your job is to wake up, be beaten, and be worked to your bones. When they get to the Red Sea, they don't know the character and nature of God. They've seen him do some incredible miracles through these plagues and some incredible things, but they don't truly know him yet. Yet, when they cross over, he shows them a miracle, and they're able to trust that he truly is leading them. When they get to their promised land, now they have experienced their God. Now in their wilderness, they have experienced a God who is compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love, steadfast, faithful, forgiving rebellion and sin, and just. They have experienced his character and his nature in the wilderness enough to know that if I take a step forward in faith, I truly am going to see that water part. We've all had our own wilderness experiences. Anyone who's been alive for longer than 5 minutes, you know we live in a broken, fallen world. And it is messy, and people are messy, and life sometimes has lots of suffering and pain, and it also is beautiful because it's filled with true joy and contentment. I think God really shows up in our own wilderness. This is where you truly get to know your Maker. If you are leaning on him and you are trusting in him, this is where you will truly get to know your Maker. The wilderness is never easy. No one likes it. I don't think there's one person who has gone through something and said, yeah, that was great, let's do it again. People usually come out and say, I don't want to ever have to go through that again, but I learned some things. The wilderness teaches us who God is, and it teaches us that he can be trusted. This is exactly what happened for the Israelites. They had seen a God who provided for them. They were in the desert for 40 years, by the way, and never once. The Bible actually says their clothes and sandals did not wear down. Now imagine having the same outfit for 40 years in the desert. They had bread magically appear to them from the sky. Quail showed up because they complained about meat. Then water came from a rock. Lord really took care of them every step of the way. They lacked nothing. They grumbled and complained a lot. But sometimes when I was a young Christian, overzealous, I would read these stories and be like, oh gosh, these people just don't get it. And now that I'm a little seasoned, I read it and I'm like, I'm just like these people. Because guess what? I grumble and complain a lot. I sometimes kind of tell God how he needs to run the world and make things work on my timelines because why not? But the wilderness, our wilderness experiences, teach us that it's not about us. He strips off that mentality of being slaves and being in bondage. He takes away that rebellion that we carry with us. And he shows us time and time again that truly the Lord is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love, and just. Joshua crosses over. They're crossing over to the Jordan River. They're getting in the Promised Land. And they're told this: choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan. So essentially what they're being told, hey, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they're going to be in the middle of the ocean. Now get 12 men representing 12 tribes of Israel. Where the priests are standing, have them grab stones from where they're standing. Because that ark, again, represents the presence of God, right? Have them grab stones from there and carry them to the other side. And then in verse 20 of chapter 4, it says this: Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea, when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and that you might always fear the Lord your God. So the stones that they gathered are placed as a memorial for future generations. So those who don't know the God that showed up in Egypt, those who don't know the God that showed up in the wilderness, those who don't know the God that had watched over them for so long, when they ask the question, what do these stones mean? People can look and say, I remember. This is when God helped us cross the Jordan River while it was in flood stage. But not only that, our journey started way back when we had to cross the Red Sea. And even before that, when the Lord had promised things to his people, starting from Abraham. Our stories, these stones, represent what God has done in our lives, how he has led us. These stones will tell the story of God's faithfulness to his people, how he kept them, how he led them, how he disciplined them, how he forgave them, and truly how he made a way for them where there seemed to be no way. Now, we all know the story of how it goes in the Old Testament. There's a whole lot of other stuff that took place. Now, let me give you some spoiler alerts. There's wars, there's captivity, there's exile, there's betrayal, there's anger, there's drought, there's famine, there's destruction, and a whole bunch of other mess. They turn away from the God of Israel and they start building their own gods. Yet in all of that, God shows up and says, I am still your God. He gives them hope. We have hope today. Our hope is in the Messiah, hope in life everlasting, hope that God truly does work everything together for our good and his glory, hope that there's a new day in Christ, hope that we can spend eternity with our Father in heaven because of the finished work of the cross. Our God truly is faithful. I want to leave you with this today. There's moments in our lives where God will part the sea, and we see the miracle happening, we see the obstacle removed, and we get to walk in faith. And then there's moments in our lives where nothing takes place and you feel like this God is distant and he doesn't care. Yet he calls us to take steps in the water and trust that he will part that sea. I mentioned earlier that my husband and I have been married for 5 years, but believe it or not, we've only lived together for 10 months. A lot of it has been delayed due to COVID, but we've had a very rough start to our marriage. There's been betrayal, deceit, and deep wounds. We were separated for about a year, and I even had filed for divorce. And I can't speak for him, but for me, this was the worst time in my life. I was angry, I was bitter, I was ashamed, I was grieving. I mean, I had never experienced an anxiety attack until I was telling someone all these physical symptoms I was having, and then she's like, oh yeah, that checks. You're having anxiety attacks every night. And there was days when I truly thought about ending it all. That was an awful wilderness. I remember being so angry, so resentful, so bitter and ashamed, and fearful for the unknown. I blamed God. I know, the pastor confessing to that, but I really truly blamed God. I blamed him for allowing this to happen to me. I blamed him for all the bad stuff that had gone on. I blamed him because I was like, excuse me, weren't you supposed to protect me and watch over me? What is this? And there was times where I truly, in that first year, was ready to give up. I mean, give up my faith. I stepped down from ministry because I honestly didn't even believe if I was capable of doing that, and then I wasn't even sure if I believed in the God I was supposed to talk about. I almost lost my faith, and I kept thinking to myself, he isn't real. Because if he was, why would it be so hard? I had no hope, and I kept saying, what's the point? Now God in his faithfulness, truly in his faithfulness, just like an Israelite, grumbling, complaining, selling, take me back, truly in his grace and faithfulness showed up in my life. Not in the way I wanted him to. I wanted him to fix everything magically and make it work for me within like a day, but he showed up in my life like this. When I was at the verge of giving up and saying, I don't even think God exists, I'm done. He kept bringing people in my life who would come back and say, hey, do you remember when you preached a sermon? And these women, in these women groups I joined, would just cry and say, that helped me. They never told it to me when I was actually pastoring, but they came after the fact and would tell me, like, that really blessed me. I kept getting cards from people in the mail saying, you really did this and that blessed me. And at first I'd be like, well, this is cute, but I don't really do that anymore, and I thought they were nothing. And then truly God kept reminding me of all the times, every single time he has shown up for me in the past. The times where I was rebellious and he had forgiven me. The times where I had nothing and he had provided for me. The times where I was angry and he showed up with a warm embrace. He reminded me of his goodness, his faithfulness, his mercy. Because I had lived through my own wilderness. He kept showing up in ways that I would remember. The only reason I stand before you here today is because truly the Lord is kind and gracious and faithful. With remembering, with telling me about things that he had done in my life, of this time when I was broken and he sent someone to embrace me and I could tell it's the presence of God. To times where he had healed me from a past wound, to times where he had used me. Those times, in my rebellion and my stubbornness, I kept saying, no, not it, that can't be right. But they kept coming in and I couldn't shake it. So here's what happened. I had to make up my mind, because enough of crying, right? Like I had to make up my mind, and I said, I either believe in him or I don't. I gotta make a decision. I can't be in the middle. So I thought, here's all the evidence I got. My brain works that way. I'm analytical. I like thinking. So I was like, here's all the evidence I got. I got these cards in the mail from people I haven't spoken to in years. I have these women who didn't talk to me while I was pastoring, but now they're telling me, here's what you did, and I really appreciated that. And I remember that I didn't remember those sermons, but they did. Here's what happened. Sharing all these stories, testimonies of what God had done in their lives, just using truly a sinner like me. And then all these experiences were kept coming back to memory. And I'm a journal keeper, so I document everything like crazy. So the experiences of, I remember this, and I remember when this happened, I remember that time when I was this. These things kept coming back, so I couldn't shake them off. So to decide, when I looked at all the evidence that was there, I said, I either believe that he exists, or I have to lie to myself and say none of these things happened. That was my turning point. I couldn't lie to myself. I couldn't lie to myself because that's just not who God is. I couldn't lie and say he doesn't care because I had proof that he did care. I couldn't lie to myself and say he's not there because I had proof that he was there. I couldn't lie to myself and say he doesn't care for me. I'm nothing to him. He's obviously caring for all these other people that are better than me and better at ministry and better at life and all this stuff. But he truly does care, and he showed up for me. This is why when we talk about things we remember, this is why it's important for future generations to know. We serve a faithful God. No matter where you are today, could be a rough marriage, maybe a bad family life, children issues, financial stuff, job stuff, just relationship stuff, health, mountaintop or darkest valley, and then everything in between. If you fell asleep before, here's what I want you to take away. God is faithful. No matter what lies ahead, the good, the bad, the ugly, the Lord is there with us. Even though the Israelites experienced good times, they also had some really, really tough times. 2 million of them died before they crossed the Jordan. If you're interested in that story's incredible. Highly recommend reading. He's with us through every little detail in our lives. God never left the Israelites through their rebellion, through everything. He showed up for them time and time again. God never left me, though I was ready to walk away. He showed up time and time again. God is faithful to us in our good times, and he's faithful to us in our bad times. God shows up when we need him the most. Whatever wilderness you're walking through today, whatever fear is holding you back, whatever worry you're carrying in your heart today, know this. Your Father in heaven loves you dearly, and he will chase after you. There's no end date to that. He just chases after you. He's a good, gracious, faithful God. And my prayer, my hope is this for you. That whatever your wilderness experience is, or whatever your promised land story is, if you're in the wilderness, the prayer is that you hold on. Walk it out faithfully, as best as you can. Be it grumbling, complaining, kicking, screaming, dragging you on the ground. Try to do as best as you can. Because God is faithful. He'll walk it with you. He'll give you all the space and room you need to figure it out, and he'll walk it with you. And if you're in your promised land, remember to share your testimony with those who are in the wilderness, to those who don't know the Lord. Because when people ask you, hey, why is it that you're not worried about this stuff? Why is it that your kids are like this? Why is it that, our company's shutting down and there's terror of job loss, but you seem content? You'll say, God provides and he's good. I brought some stones today. They're at the back. They're by the donation box just out that door. My hope is this, that as you walk out this morning, you would grab one. The stones are not magical. They have no special powers, unfortunately. But it's just a reminder. It's a reminder of God's faithfulness to you, whatever that means to you. And if you're in the wilderness, hold on, because you're going to get a stone or two when you get out. And if you're in the promised land, declare it from the mountaintops that God is faithful.